Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Financewize, the show that empowers you to make informed decisions about your money. I'm Dantukasumi Malani, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing bonds. Have you ever borrowed money? Of course you have. Whether we borrow a few dollars from our parents to buy sweets as children or ask the bank for a home loan, most of us have borrowed money at some point in our lives. Just as people need money, so do companies and governments. A company needs funds to expand into new markets, while governments need money for everything from infrastructure to social programs. Today's episode on bonds is sponsored by the Financial Literacy Initiative. As you know from our previous episodes, the Financial Literacy Initiative was officially launched in March 2012 in order to improve financial education and consumer protection. The FLI was rolled out in 10 different regions during 2012 and will be further rolled out this year. Now let's see what ordinary Namibians on the streets have to say about bonds.
What is a bond?
No, I think it's a contractual agreement between individuals and financial institutions.
A bond, I think the principle or the concept actually comes from holding together or bonding or chaining. So I think it has to do with some sort of a debt that brings some sort of a benefit at the end. So I think at the moment in the markets, it's in the form of an investment that a person might be able to purchase early and then at the maturity date get a return on it, something like that.
And I believe that Namibia is a nation that has to be educated more. From the bank's point of view, should try to educate people what are the product, what is a bond, what's the definition of a bond, what are the other bonds? What are different bonds? Maybe I might only know one thing. There might be a different definition of it.
Do you currently invest in a bond market?
Not at the moment, no, but as soon as I feel I'm financially stable, then I'll look into it, yeah.
Not yet, but I do plan to, in the near future, to do that.
What is a coupon in respect to the bond?
A coupon will be the amount of interest that you're allowed to pay monthly or whatever, according to the terms of the contract.
Would you consider investing money in the bond market?
Yes, I would. But it's very expensive to invest in that. But if you have opportunity, you can invest. But you must do your calculation very well.
I think the one thing that I heard about recently are treasury bonds or government bonds, which are issued at a certain value and then over 90 days or 180 days they mature and you buy it at a discounted price and then you make. So yeah, I would say that I would invest if I had enough money, bulk enough, I would invest in bonds because it seems to be one of the safest investments around.
Yes, of course. I think it's preferred safe investment vehicle compared to any other investment vehicle that are available in the market, because it's quite secured. If you have invested in government bonds, it's 100% secured.
Really, a bond is nothing more than a loan for which you are the lender. The organization that sells a bond is known as the issuer. You can think of a bond as an IOU given by a borrower, the issuer, to a lender, the investor, which in this case is you. Of course, nobody would lend out his or her hard-earned money for nothing. The issuer of a bond must pay the investor something extra for the privilege of using his or her money. This extra comes in the form of interest payments, which are made at a predetermined rate and schedule. The interest rate is often referred to as the coupon. The date on which the issuer has to repay the amount borrowed, known as the face value or principal, is called the maturity date. Bonds are known as fixed income securities because you know the exact amount of cash you'll get back if you hold the security until maturity. All of this may sound a bit complicated. This is why in the next training clip, we try to explain how bonds work in a more practical way. The easiest way to understand bonds is to think about what happens when you lend money to a friend or family member. Usually, all you require is your money back after an amount of time agreed upon by both of you. A bond starts off in the same way, except in this instance, it involves an individual lending money to the government or to a company. The government or the company borrowing the money from you is called the issuer, because the entity is issuing a bond to the public. The money lent to the government or company is known as the principal or face value. This is the amount that will be returned to you after a pre-stated amount of time has passed. The difference between bonds and normal money lending to friends and family comes in because the bond issuer has to pay you a certain predetermined percentage of the total amount lent at a predetermined interval, usually once or twice a year, over the period of time that the principal or borrowed money is held by the issuer, also known as the maturity. Remember, the issuer is the company or government in whose bonds you have invested. The time which the principal or borrowed money spends in the possession of the issuer is called the duration of the bond. The annual percentage paid over to the lender by the issuer for the duration of the bond is called the coupon payment. For example, if the government issues a 10-year bond valued at 10,000 Namibian dollars to the public at a coupon of 10% and you decide to buy this bond, you lend the government 10,000 Namibian dollars of your money in return for 10 annual payments of 1,000 Namibian dollars or 20 semi-annual payments of 500 Namibian dollars in the case where payments are made twice a year instead of once a year. A further benefit of bonds is that once the 10 years have passed, you receive the total amount of your principal, the money you lent out, 10,000 Namibian dollars, back when the bond is redeemed, which means the money is returned by the issuer or government or company. This means that over the 10 years you have received 10 payments of $1,000 plus your initial investment of 10,000 Namibian dollars back at the end of the period, totaling 20,000 Namibian dollars or a return of 10% per year for 10 years. Let's recap. If you buy a bond with a face value or principal of 10,000 Namibian dollars, a coupon of 10% and a maturity of 10 years, this means you will receive a total of 1,000 Namibian dollars, which is 10,000 times 10% of interest per year for the next 10 years. Actually, because most bonds pay interest semi-annually, you will receive 2 payments of 500 a year for 10 years. When the bond matures after 10 years, you will get your 10,000 Namibian dollars back. Bonds may be a good addition to your investment plan for a number of reasons. Bonds offer the opportunity to spread your risk by investing in a different type of investment vehicle. I'm sure you've heard the term, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, bonds are a different basket you can put your eggs or your money into. Other investment types include property, starting your own business, or buying livestock such as cattle. Bonds can also provide valuable tax advantages. as interest gained from bonds issued by the state is exempt from taxes unless you are investing into a unit trust, in which case you will be subject to a 10% withholding tax in Namibia. After a bond is sold by the issuer for the first time in what is called a primary auction, it can be freely bought and sold in what is called the secondary market. This is where bond prices change due to changing economic conditions that can either be positive or negative for the buyers and sellers of bonds. What this means is that you are not obligated to hold a bond until it matures and is redeemed by the issuer. You can sell it at any time in the secondary market. However, there is no guarantee that you will get the same price that you paid for it. It may be higher or lower depending on certain economic factors. If you can sell the bond for a higher price than what you bought it for, you gain from capital appreciation. However, if you are desperate to sell for some reason and are unlucky enough to be facing negative economic conditions for the bond market, you may have to sell for a lower price than what you initially bought it for, in which case you lose and the new buyer gains. In this instance, the person you sell the bond to in the secondary market gains because the interest payment remains 10% of 10,000 Namibian dollars until the bond is redeemed by the issuer. Therefore, the second buyer will be getting a higher interest rate or yield than you were getting when you held the bond. The next clip illustrates this in a practical example. If you sell a bond you originally bought for 10,000 Namibian dollars for 9,000 Namibian dollars to another person, this second buyer will also get 1,000 Namibian dollars yearly payments until the bond is redeemed or he sells it to someone else. However, since he bought it from you for only 9,000 Namibian dollars, his return on investment, known as the yield, will be 1,000 divided by 9,000, which equals 11%, compared to the 10% interest rate you were getting when you held the bond. The issuer of a bond is a crucial factor to consider, as the issuer's stability is your main assurance of getting paid back. For example, in most countries, the government is a far more secure issuer than any company. Its default risk, or the chance that the money you invested will not be paid back, is extremely small. So small that most government securities are known as risk-free assets. The reason behind this is that a government will usually be able to bring in future revenue through taxation. A company, on the other hand, must continue to make profits, which is far from guaranteed. This added risk means company bonds must offer a higher interest rate in order to attract investors. So how does one tell if a certain bond is worth buying or not? There is a bond rating system available to help investors determine how risky it is to buy a bond of a certain company or government. Think of a bond rating as an organization's ITC report. It's an indication of a government or company's financial stability, a gauge as to whether or not that company or government will be able to pay back the money you have lent it after the investment period is over. Financially stable governments and companies have a high rating, while risky companies have a low rating. Incidentally, the Namibian government has received a BBB- rating from one of the top 3 international rating agencies, indicating investment grade or good credit quality. The highest an entity can receive is AAA. Now that we understand how bonds work, how does one go about purchasing a bond? There are a number of ways to invest in bonds. You can utilize a dealer at a stockbroking company to buy the bonds on your behalf. You can also purchase bonds by approaching your local commercial bank and informing them that you would like to buy bonds. They will inform you of the procedures and conduct the transaction on your behalf. Another way to expose yourself to bonds is to invest in a fixed income unit trust portfolio at a financial institution such as an investment management company. To discover more about bonds and exactly how one goes about purchasing bonds here in Namibia, we decided to speak to local financial institutions. See what they had to say in the next clip.
My name is Bruce Hansen. I work at Simony Storm Securities, which is a stockbroking company. What we do is we basically buy and sell shares for individuals and for institutions on the Namibian Stock Exchange and also on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And furthermore, we also do portfolio management for individual clients.
What is a bond?
A bond is basically a loan, if one would have to be simplistic. It is a loan that either the Namibian government or a corporation or a semi-government institution for that matter issue. So what you have is that typically government will look at what the government deficit is, and to fund that government deficit they would like then to go to the Namibian public and ask the Namibian public to borrow money. And so what will happen is that there's a specific amount that government will issue. Let's say that's 1 million. They will issue that amount. They will have an interest rate, let's say for instance 8%, and they will have a term. They will issue the bond for the next 5 years or the next 10 years or the next 15 years, depending on what their need is. And so the Namibian investor will basically borrow money to the Namibian government, and that money is being paid over a specific period, that 10 years or 5 years. Money is being repaid by government to the Namibian investor, and at the end of that period the big amount, the 1 million, will be repaid to the Namibian investor. So you can think of it as a loan from one person to the other. In this case it's just you have an institution that issue that loan.
Which institutions issue bonds in the Namibian market?
First of all, the largest issuer of bonds is the Namibian government. We also have semi-government institutions such as Telecom, Nampower, the Road Fund Administration, and then we also have banks which we call corporations. So Standard Bank, for instance, and Bank Windhoek also have bonds that are listed on the Namibian Stock Exchange. So those are the major players really in the Namibian market.
Please tell our viewers how one goes about purchasing a bond.
The Bank of Namibia, and this is now in governments, in the Namibian government instance, the Bank of Namibia will issue a government bond or government bonds on behalf of the Namibian government. And so what happens is typically someone like us, a stockbroker or brokers, and also dealers, and these are banks, they will go to the Bank of Namibia and they will tender for that specific bond. Now you can have a bond that's a 5-year bond or a 10-year bond or 30-year bond, and you choose which one you would like to take up. So the Bank of Namibia will then have a tender. We will tender for that specific bond, and then depending on what your price is, you will then get that bond. Now some individuals also go to the Bank of Namibia and tender on their own, but mostly your brokers and your dealers will either do it on behalf of their clients, or they will do it for their own book. So a Namibian investor is advised to either go to a bank or to go to a stockbroker and then ask them to assist them with buying a bond.
How do interest rates and inflation affect bonds?
If one look at interest rates, firstly maybe I should just explain that if you take a bond would normally be issued at a specific interest rate. So if interest rates today are at 5%, government or any of the others will look at that and say, all right, we would like to issue a bond at 6% or at 5% for that matter, because that's what the normal or what the current interest rate is. So they would issue it at that point in time, let's say at 5%. Now, if interest rates go up from 5% to 6% over the years, your interest rate on the bond remains fixed, because your bond is what you have is there's an interest rate that's determined upon issuing of the bond, and that interest rate remains for the full term. So for the 5 years, if it's a 5-year bond, your interest rate will remain at 5%. If it's a 10-year bond, your interest rate will remain at 5%. So if you issue the bond at 5% and interest rates increase from 5% to 6% to 7%, what you're sitting with a bond that has a return that's less than the interest rate that you could have gotten if you deposit money today at the bank. When it comes to the inflation rate of and the link between inflation rate and a bond, again, one would have to look at the timing. So if the inflation today is 6% and your bond is let's say your bond is also 6%. Now you buy your bond today, remember the 6% is fixed over the period of the bond. So if you buy the bond today at 6% and inflation increases from 6% to 8%, it means that the investment that you've made at 6% is now returning a loss to you, because you take the inflation rate, which is 8%, which is now moved from 6% to 8%. You take that 8%, you minus the 6% that you're getting on the bond. So that means that you actually your return is a minus 2%. Because remember, what you would like to do with any investment is that you would like to at least beat inflation, because inflation erodes the purchasing power of your money. So if your bond returns only 6% to you and the inflation rate is 8%, you should actually switch it around, 6 minus 8, then you get minus 2% return. So there's a risk involved in that. Again, you have to make sure, whenever you buy the bond, how does the inflation rate look like, and how would it look like in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time? Because there's a potential loss a real loss that you can make in terms of the return that you would like your bond to give you.
What should an investor be aware of when investing in the bond market?
What investors should consider, they should consider that bonds are part of your portfolio. So if you look at your portfolio and where you invest your money, you invest your money in cash, so you pay the money into the bank. You buy stocks on the stock exchange, and then you have bonds in your portfolio. So that is just part. You need to think about bonds as being an investable instrument, and that must be part of your portfolio. Now, what bonds do to a portfolio is, first of all, it does bring a consistent income. Remember, we've talked about you get 8% interest on the bond for the period of the bond. So that brings in that consistent income. Bonds are also not as volatile as stocks, for instance. Stocks, you have all the ups and downs every day. With bonds, you don't have that wild fluctuations. In Namibia, currently what we have for the investor gets a tax-free return on the interest of the bond. So they don't pay any interest. That's now an individual, not corporations, individuals. So individuals get, if they get an interest, if they get the interest amount, that interest amount is not taxed. And even when they get the principal back, the big amount, if they get that back, that's not being taxed. So that's a huge advantage for an investor.
Now that you have some first-hand information about bonds, you can get started investing. Remember that there is no time like the present to start improving your financial prospects for your future. We have mentioned earlier that this episode is supported by the National Financial Literacy Initiative. The FLI has developed several street theaters which give tips on saving, budgeting, and spending in a very entertaining but still educating way. For additional information on the initiative, you can fetch one of these FLI booklets or posters at the Ministry of Finance in Windhoek, or download the FLI booklet at the website below. Please remember that the points made in this program are not meant to give you personal advice. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to managing your finances. The point of this program is to give you a more tangible look at how a business person or individual might implement the ideas discussed. There are many other alternatives out there, and we strongly encourage you to explore them and see what works best for you. Whatever you do, keep the principles we've discussed in mind and never stop trying to learn more. This is Dantakashimi Malani encouraging you to get finance wise. See you next time.